Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite dark sorcerer here. And today I'd like to discuss with you the different types of necromancy practices that are out there that you can do research on, the types of tools that can be employed and for what purposes, and most importantly, philosophy. Okay, let's start out with philosophy. Okay, first and foremost, it's the most dullest thing out there. I get it. It really is. But it plays a part within any given system of sorcery. People just don't realize it because they don't realize that there are different applications to necromancy. So, why don't we begin? Around the second or third century, there was a philosopher known as Crates. He had a pupil named Zeno. Zeno had a near death experience. Okay. And this was right off the coast of Israel. Okay. And when he went into this region, he started learning about Socrates and many other types of philosophical thought forms. And what's interesting to note here is that we see two different applications of thought in practice. First of all, you have Zeno. Okay, a man who his belief was the quickest way to sagehood was to get rid of everything. I mean, we're talking about a guy that was rich. Okay, I'm talking he was a salesman. He literally did a lot of selling and trading, made a lot of freaking money. Okay, not only that, but he came from a very well established household. Okay. So what's interesting here is that after his near-death experience and he started learning philosophy in ancient Greek, you know, he discovered that the greatest way to sagehood was to get rid of everything. That means get rid of your wealth, get rid of anything that would hinder your path working to self-reflection, self-knowledge, higher levels of knowledge. And it was very interesting because in his eyes, if you had any needs or wants or desires, in the Christian terms, this is called the seven deadly sins. Okay. In Satanism, when one sin takes, applies itself, another will arise and you would get out of it. Okay. You'd move on to a different one. But in Zeno's eyes, one desire, one want would lead to another. And in a society as he knew it back then, which we can actually look at our society and see how these wants, these desires, the desires to have the latest fashion, the desire for freedom of religion, or the freedom of, let's say, for an example, equality. Okay, you know, equal gun rights or whatever you want to talk about, okay, or contemplate upon, okay, would lead into another one and another and another and another. And before long, within a societal fashion, would lead to slavery, would lead to violence, would lead to chaos, and most importantly, factions, a world order. Think of it as the classes: the rich, the medium society, and then the poor and homeless. Same avenue that took place back then that we see today. And Then we see the polar opposite within a man's desire known as I'm gonna try to pronounce this guy's name. It's one of those weird freaking Greek names that you don't see very often. Okay, and it's known as Pictorius. Okay, and it's funny because of the fact that his thought form within a state of philosophy was indulgence. The best way I can describe this one is to look at it from a satanic perspective: self preservation and self gratification. Self preservation being the highest law of a Satanist, and self gratification being the second most highest law. Basically, meaning that whatever brings you self gratification is all good as long as it doesn't violate the highest and most important law of a Satanist. Okay. So it didn't matter if you sought after women, it didn't matter if you sought after materials, it didn't matter if you sought after land. Okay, these are natural desires, wants, and needs of any given individual. Okay, so unlike that of Zeno's perspective, which later gave rise to Marcus Aurelius, um, Sun Tzu, uh, practices such as Shinto and Bushido, and a whole bunch of different contemplative, reflective traditions of thought and practice of solitude, hermetism, and that of a scholar. Okay, academics. This really did have a rise and a fall throughout history, right up until Christianity took over, and it was literally stomped out for a time. But then made a well, let's just say it came back with a vengeance. Okay, just like witchcraft, it's like a thorn in their side. You just can't get rid of us. No, just kidding. But anyways, um, but yeah, you see these two perspectives, and they are the best perspectives of the world. You have those who really don't desire anything. They're happy with who they are happy with what they're studying and practicing. And then you got those who are looking for control. You got those who are looking to, you know, do more. They want finances. They want that $1 million paycheck. They want and they want and they want, and they'll walk over your corpse to get it. Okay. You look at the last year, prime example. Half the country was burning. The other half was up in rioting. Okay. How many times have you seen a civilization rise up against their government? Okay. Think about that for just a minute. Very few notifications throughout history. Okay. We saw it in the time of Napoleon. We saw it in the time of the Roman Empire. We saw it again in the time around Italy. Okay. During World War II, specifically that around Sicily area, southern Italy. And on top of that, we continue to see this throughout Africa. Okay, so it's very, very few instances where the culture will rise up against their government. Okay, just like what happened earlier this year, within the here in the U.S., where people actually started petitioning at the White House, but few were there for a different agenda. Okay. You had people doing a peaceful protest, and then you had these other ones who had wants and desires. Okay. They had a means and a purpose. Prime example right there. You can't get more clear. And that was basically the satanic view of self gratification and, most importantly, self preservation. That's what that was. You had two different agendas going on there: one doing it the legal way, the other breaking the law, okay, of the land. And that's basically what Zeno was discovering for himself as after his near death of a shipwreck. Okay? So when you look at history and you look into philosophy, even Sun Tzu in The Art of War said to know one's enemy is to know one's self. Find out what you're capable of, and you will know exactly what your opponent is willing to do. Okay? How far are you willing to go? How far are you willing to take it? That is what Zeno was getting at. But more so, he was more concerned with death. You can't take your worldly possessions with you. You can't even take your body, your temple, your physical form with you when you begin your journey into other dimensions and realms. And that's what Zeno was getting at from a academic and scholar perspective, okay, within philosophy. A lot of people don't realize that. Even in Shinto, it was more about serving the gods and that spiritualism. Bushido, the way of the samurai, was to live as though every moment was your last. That means everything from passion, desire, how much pain you can handle, how much clarity do you have. Okay, so again, you're seeing that double standard there. Philosophy plays a huge part within our culture. I mean, let's face it, you've had plays like that of the Bouchard, the Faustian Deal, the classical play of Faust. You've had ancient plays that inspired great men of academic and philosophical perspectives. Okay? Even Christopher Penziak, a great author today within shamanism and witchcraft, in his book, he described witchcraft and sorcery as being an art, a science, and most indefinitely a religion. Okay? You notice I said art. So let's look at art for just a second. Art can be anything from writing, drawing, a type of martial arts. We all know that martial arts or military service is a form of death. You are practicing death magic. Finger thrust to the throat can crush the larynx and the voice box. A palm heel to the chest, specifically the sternum. 7 pounds per square inch. That's all it takes to shatter the sternum. Okay? That holds your rib cage together. Okay? Knowing the nervous system. We're going into medical aspects now. Okay? So when we get into the medical aspects, now we're getting into the science. Science aspects is from medical. How does the body work? Why does it work a certain way? And what controls everything? There's been controversy between the heart and the mind. Which one controls everything? Throughout religious perspectives, we see how rejuvenation of corpses have played into effect within the medical profession, going as far back as the 15th century. We know that torture has been played in for over 1,000 years. Go back to the Roman Empire, and you have the crucifixion. Okay, the crucifixions where they crucify you. Okay, suffocation was the main thing that eliminated those who were crucified on the cross. They would break your legs so you could not hold yourself up and you would literally suffocate. All right, the lungs playing a huge part into it. Think about that for just a minute. Blood transfusions. How do you kill off bad parts of the brain? What if I told you that they utilize cold, icy water because they believed back in the 16th century that that was a way to straighten out your mind? Let's go a little bit further. Let's go let's go 17th, 18th century. They drilled holes to let out the demons. They did the same thing all the way back in the 11th century to let the demons out of your head. Electrocution could stop a heart or start it. Think about that for just a moment. Can stop a heart, but with the correct jewels, can restart it. Think about that for just a minute. This is just in the medical field going back 300 years. 300 to 400 years. Interesting, isn't it? Now, how many plays do we have? We have the classical of Faust, Dante's Inferno, Homer's Odyssey. Think about it. How many go all the way back to the 3rd century, 11th century, or I should say the 2nd century? Go into grimoire traditions. You see other classifications of the religion, the science. Okay? Think about that for just a moment. There's a lot that goes into it. Get into the herbs, the plants, the animals, the venoms, the poisons. And again, you're getting into alchemy. You're getting into the sciences associated with death, the death essence. Go into the Kabbalah. Let's go into the religious aspect. The belief is that the skull was the portal between this world and the spiritual. It was the portal between this world and all of the dimensions. Just like a scrying mirror, a scrying bowl, a crystal ball. Okay? All of these things, from a religious perspective, was believing in the soul, the spirit, where it goes in the end. But I find it interesting because when we go into the land of sorcerers, such as Giza in Egypt, we see the Shem priests. That is SEM, for those of you who want to look that up. These priests, this specific priesthood, was responsible for removing organs, washing the body down, the corpse, the cadaver, the lick or the glick, if you're going into Russian or German terminology. The European cadaver, okay? The corpse in Greek, okay? All of these things, this priesthood would wash the body down. A priest would recite an incantation as they make a tiny slit in your side and remove the 4 vital organs that they believed you would need if you ever returned. Think mummification. Okay? But here's the kicker. They would take a fish hook, shove it up your nose, puncture the brain. That's right. Puncture the brain, because that was not a vital organ that you needed. They would swirl it around and pull it right out through your nostril. And while they're performing all of this, you have somebody else begin mummifying you. They would bandage you up, starting with your feet, leaving your head for last. This priesthood was responsible for the incantations in your spiritual journey, for preparing your corpse for burial, for mummification, entombing you, embalming you, the whole kit and caboodle. So I want you to think about that for just a minute, because sometimes these priests would be run out of town, chased literally right out of town, out of fear, ignorance. Other times they were honored and highly respected. They had different levels of ranks within their priesthood. But let's go into the Iranian Shin. This was a religious priesthood, highly trained in warrior combat. Over 300 established kills. Choice, a dagger, a ritual dagger, anathema. They go back as far as the 10th century. I believe it was 1025 to 1275 area, when the Mongols wiped them out. They were established as assassins. They were highly trained and they were highly religious. Kind of reminds you of, how should I say this? The Knights of Templar, which go all the way back to the 6th century in Europe. Think about that for just a minute. You're dealing with a religious order, you're dealing with warriors, you're dealing with healers, and you're dealing with the priesthood. Interesting, isn't it? And these just go back about 1400 years. And keep in mind, it was Christianity that wiped most of these orders out. The Shin was actually wiped out by the Mongols, which was different. These were people that believed in dark shamanism, the yellow shamanism, good versus evil, light versus dark. Keep that in mind. So, when we get into necromantic rites and rituals, we have to look at it not only from a philosophical perspective, but we also have to look at it from a medical, a scientific perspective. Now let's take it into an actual art. Now let's take it into the arts. How do you believe in a ritualistic manner? What tools do you utilize? If we go by the Old Testament within the Bible, there's a depiction of King Saul going to the Witch of Endor, a blood witch, a necromancer. Okay? The most powerful conjurer of her time. And many of today's witchcraft practitioners, such as Christian Day and a few others, have actually spoken about her. But very few get into the techniques, get into necrology, thanatology. Let's get into necromancy, necrophagia, or let's go with a whole bunch of different things, such as necrophilia, necrotology, necrophagia. Probably butchered that name. And then we get into Nicaea, which is back in ancient Greek. Nicaea was actually associated closely with shamanism back then because of the fact that it was associated both with spiritualism and herbalism. So when we get into this, we can go into the Academy of how should I say this, necromancia. Okay, and it's interesting because there's actually schools that are being established. I mean, people are willing to put down millions of dollars to establish a school. I believe there's actually a school right now being put into play from Canada, right here in the US. Found that was interesting. It was like 1.5 million or something like that, that they were willing to establish a school to teach you necromancy. The tools, however, such as the athame, everybody in every system has an athame, some form of tool that was used for bloodletting, cutting, energy directing, even. Okay? Bones, such as the skull, the jawbone, ribs, finger bones. These things were utilized for numerous different types of rituals. And I want you to think about this for just a moment. Skulls sat in the center of the pentagram. They were used and believed to be the spiritual nexus, the doorway between worlds, the gateway. The bones of the fingers could be used in a form of divination, such as runes, bone casting. The bigger bones could be inscribed with seals or sigils and utilized in a fashion of, say, ritual defenses. They could be used and empowered as dark totems. Coffins were good for not only storing a cadaver that for future workings, but most importantly, look at it from a point of view of you can even sleep there. It helps you identify with the death essence. Depending if you're going with the Roman Negromancy or that of the Necromancy, the art of divining by corpse. Okay? In Roman, Negromancy is the art of black magic. Nicaea was the spiritual pursuit of knowledge through divination, which is where the energies and the currents can come into play. Now, what's ironic is that you can actually take a bone and take a shark's tooth. This is known as in 16th century witchcraft as the spirit tooth, athame. Okay, you put them together and you have one hell of a powerful ritualistic tool. Okay, graveyard dirt could be used to empower your rituals. They could be used for placing a curse, a jinx, a hex upon somebody, utilizing some form of spirituality against somebody, like, say, sending a demon after them, much like the gopher dust in ancient in hoodooism. Very interesting stuff. Hair, fingernail clippings, blood, okay, semen, whatever. You know, this stuff can be used to link an individual and is believed to link an individual to a spell or a ritual. Now, you think of three classifications of rituals known today: destruction, compassion, and lust are the three types of rituals. Now, obviously, these are just three titles. There are many different types of rituals and rites that befall these three. Bringing somebody to you, if you're dealing with a lust ritual, okay? Say, breaking up a couple, whatever. Destruction rituals are simply jinx, hex, or curse. Curses are meant to destroy. Hexes are meant to teach, and jinxes are just simply bad luck. Compassion rituals could be anything from monetary gain to, maybe bettering your livelihood. Okay? A lot of people don't realize this. Blood is another thing. Like I said, blood, fingernail clippings, it's basically goes into what is known as the soul factor, especially if you're utilizing an effigy such as a voodoo doll. Okay? And I'll get into that in a second when I get to the soul aspect. The breath is said to fuel your rites and rituals and empower. It's to link an item to your ritual. Okay? That is something that's very, very interesting. I'm still looking into that one. Let's see, stones such as amherst, necromancer's jade, marble, onyx, obsidian. These are all things that modern day witches would use for crystal balls, such as the quartz crystal. You just make one big ass freaking quartz crystal, and there's your crystal ball. You know, you can use them and charge them for protection, for reversals. You can use them to empower your rituals, spiritual divining or divination, okay? Or even just simply put into a grist bag and carry upon you for any kind of working, especially if you deal with metals. Okay, if you deal with metals such as gold, brass, or silver, you add a crystal, a silver, coin, inscribed with certain seals or sigils. You can easily create one powerful protection amulet or one hell of a fucking curse, depending on how you want to look at it and what your intent is through that ritual. Okay, so and then we can go into what is known as the soul. The soul can be used within many different types of rituals and rites. Practitioners such as demonolators could buy your soul or steal it. Okay, look at the Bokor and Haitian Voodoo. A Bokor is known to work with demons, just like a Satanist, just like a dark witchcraft, just like in dark shamanism or dark witchcraft, dark paganism. Okay, they work with spirits. Now, what better way to earn better favor, to gain knowledge, to gain more power, than to take a soul and give it and sell it to a demon? Think about that for just a moment. What better way than to sell it to a demon, to give it to a demon as an offering for favor? Not just that, but you could even use a coffin and utilize that soul. Use a spirit box even, and use that Naganga if you're into Santeria, Pero Mayambi, or that of the Cauldron if you're into witchcraft. House that spirit there. Utilize it. Like the Orisha, the Loa, who are willing to help you, or just a spirit who is willing to help you. Utilize it there. It's called a spirit box for a reason. You could also utilize a spirit in the same way as a psychic vampire. Anton Zandelavay named that off perfectly. It is someone who feeds off your energy. But what if you take that soul and you use it as food? What then? That could sustain you for years. It's one hell of a good meal, especially if you're recharging yourself. And it's interesting on how that works in itself. You can use it for blackmail to gain money and currency from the family who is trying to free their loved one. You can utilize it as hostage, in a sense, in that same manner. But there's so many different ways that you can use someone's soul. So many different methods. So, just to put that out there, and there's a lot more that's going to go into this. But I noticed a couple of people on here. Alkalone, what's going on? And Ghost. Let's see. Most likely you were being initiated, Ghost, into a ritual or into a certain tradition. Could be a, how should I say this, a ancestral lineage, family line of sorcerers and sorceresses. You're welcome, Ghost. Are you sure it was Satan? Because there's a lot of different agents of death out there. Christianity believes that Satan was the enemy, the accuser, how should I say, the adversary, the tempter, when in fact he was filling an office in angelology. It goes as far back as the Talmud. Okay, the how should I say this? The Jewish Haggadah, and most importantly, the poetical scrolls. It's not just anything new. I mean, if you go back into Egypt, you actually have Set or Seth, who was considered to be their Satan. Norse mythology, you have Loki. If you go into Slavic, you have Chernobog, the dark god. Zoroastrianism, you have Orion. Go back into angelology, go into what do they call that? The three books of Enoch, the book of Enoch, and you have Azazel, the dark god, the one who taught men how to forge weapons and alchemy, and taught women how to paint their face, makeup and the art of seduction. Go into Christianity and you have Satan, El Shaitan, if you're into Islamic traditions, you know. So I mean, there's a lot of different personas out there of just the bad guy. Ancient Mesopotamia, you have Mephistopheles, the pact maker, the deal maker. So really, you want to make sure that you're in the right type of practice. If they're calling forth Satan, they could just simply be Satanists. The question is it um, traditional, Luciferian, spiritual, theistic, agnostic? Think about that for just a moment. Or even demonolators. We all work with Satan in that area. And yes, I am a traditional Satanist. I practice traditional, theistic, and spiritual Satanism, not just necromancy and witchcraft. So you do want to make sure that you know which tradition you're into. All right? So I hope this has been educational. I hope it's been enlightening. And I hope you go out and you delve into the research and the mythology. Don't just stick to the spiritual aspects. Get into the medical, get into the scientific, get into the actual arts as well. Because all of this stuff plays into a huge, huge factor within necromancy and death. Okay? And before I go, there's one more thing I want to talk about. The Bars Thadal, otherwise known as the art of dying. Today it's known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, was actually the study of death. Okay? This is where thanatology came into play. And it was the understanding of the soul's progress from life to death, the journey, okay, of dying. Get into it. It's actually pretty cool. All right. So, with that said, have a good one. And until next time.